It is a sad situation in the configuration of the affairs of this world that we, living in a small island developing state like Jamaica, are the recipients of the increasingly vicious effects of the climate crisis, a crisis which we did very little, if anything, to cause. The global warming, as a result of the excessive use of carbon and emissions from carbon fuels over the last few centuries since the Industrial Revolution, that global warming has largely been driven by the wealthy economies of the world. And yet we, in Jamaica and other islands like ourselves, are suffering the consequences of that on an annual basis. We were hit by beryl or scraped by beryl last year. It was a serious hit. And this year we got walloped by Melissa. It's really a shame that the international financial community is still approaching the mitigation of the effects of climate-induced disasters on countries like ours by financing packages that are largely based on additional debt. These debts that we are now going to be incurring to finance our attempts at recovery are like lending money to a business that suffered losses through some kind of crisis that is trying to dig itself out of a hole from. Taking on additional debt to do that is going to be a challenging road for any country. Therefore, I don't think it's appropriate to treat these announcements in a triumphant way. We are going to be incurring the costs of paying back this massive additional borrowing in years to come. We are in a country which has spent the last 15 years seeking to get ourselves out of a debt trap, where we've had to run massive primary surpluses every year consistently to reduce our debt to GDP ratio, with a target that's written into our law incidentally by a government from this side, which we were anticipating would have been met this year before Melissa struck us. And now we are facing a new era of massive incremental borrowing. If you look at $3.6 billion US of sovereign debt, that's over 25% of GDP of additional borrowing. That does, and the 662 billion already available, only less than half of that is in a form that's not debt. Most of that is debt as well. This $2.4 billion of private capital, we look forward to seeing whether that will be forthcoming and in what volumes, because you can't project that you're going to receive private investment as part of your recovery. I'm glad that the multilaterals are going to support the effort, but at the end of the day, investors have to be willing and there have to be projects available to them that are bankable and investable. So we will see whether or not that happens. But the reality is that only 12 million US out of how much? $7 billion is grant funding. Only 12 million US out of over 6 billion of programmed US funding is grant funding. That is the world that we as Jamaicans, both you on that side and us on this side, have to navigate. So while I admire and indeed share optimism about the future, because Jamaica is such a resilient and special country, and we will get through this, I think we should approach I think we should approach an announcement like this with some sobriety. Where this event has caused us to retrace our steps substantially from the economic path we were on, and which the nation incurred substantial sacrifices to get to where we were. I'm not blaming the government for Melissa. That would be absurd. I'm not blaming the government for seeking resources to fund the recovery. It's going to be necessary to get those resources. I am just making the point that this is not something to celebrate. This is not something to gloat about. This represents a substantial setback for Jamaica, and it represents if it's not administered properly, it could permanently weaken our future prospects and damage the country's future.